Welcome to my humble abode, darlings. Come in out of the rain and get comfortable. I have a story to tell you, and I hope you enjoy. If you do, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Island of Dr Moreau, Chapter 13. A Parley. I turned again and went down towards the sea. I found the hot steam broadening out to a shallow, weedy sand, in which an abundance of crabs and long-bodied, many-legged creatures started from my footfall. I walked to the very edge of the salt water, and then I felt I was safe. I turned and stared, arms akimbo, at the thick green behind me, into which the steamy ravine cut like a smoking gash. But, as I say, I was too full of excitement, and truly saying those who have never known danger may doubt it, too desperate to die. Then I came into my head, and there was one chance before me yet. With Moreau and Montgomery and their bestial rabble chased me through the island, I might not go round the beach until I came to their enclosure, make a flank march upon them, in fact, and then with a rock lugged out of their loosely built wall, perhaps smash the lock of the smaller door and see what I could find, knife, pistol, or what not, to fight them with. When they returned, it was at any rate something to try. So I turned to the westward and walked along the water's edge. The setting sun flashed its blinding heat into my eyes. The slight Pacific tide was running in with rapid ripple. Presently the shore fell away southward, and the sun came round upon my right hand. Then suddenly, far in front of me, I saw first one and then several figures emerge from the bushes. Moreau, with his gray staghound, then Montgomery, and two others. At that I stopped. They saw me and began gesticulating and advancing. I stood watching them approach. The two beast men came running forward to cut me off from the undergrowth inland. Montgomery came, running also, but straight towards me. Moreau followed slower with the dog. At last I roused myself from my inaction and turned seaward, walked straight into the water. The water was very shallow at first. I was 30 yards out before the waves reached my waist. Dimly I could see the interstitial creatures darting away from my feet. "What are you doing, man?" cried Montgomery. I turned, standing waist-deep, and stared at them. Montgomery stood panting at the margin of the water. His face was bright red with exertion, his long flaxen hair blown about his head, and his dropped nether lip showed his irregular teeth. Moreau was just coming up, his face pale and firm, and the dog at his hand barked at me. Both men had heavy whips. Further up the beach stared the beast men. "What am I doing? I'm going to drown myself," I said. Montgomery and Moreau looked at each other. "Why?" asked Moreau. "Because it's better than being tortured by you." "I told you so," said Montgomery, and Moreau said something in a low tone. "What makes you think I shall torture you?" asked Moreau. "What I saw," I said, "and those yonder." "Hush," said Moreau, and held up a hand. "I will not," I said. "They were men. What are they now? I, at least, will not look like them." I looked past my interlocutors. Up the beach were M'Ling, Montgomery's attendant, and one of the white, swathed brutes from the boat. Further up, in the shadow of the trees, I saw my little ape-man, and behind him some other dim figures. "Who are these creatures?" I said, pointing to them, and raising my voice more and more that it might reach them. "They were men like yourself, whom you have infected with some bestial taint. Men whom you have enslaved, and whom you instill fear." "You who listen," I cried, pointing now to Moreau and shouting past him to the beastmen. "You who listen, do you not see these men still fear you, go in dread of you? Why then do you fear them? You are many." "Oh, for God's sake," cried Montgomery. "Stop that, Prendick." "Prendick," cried Moreau. They both shouted together, as if to drown my voice, and behind them lowered the staring faces of the beastmen, wondering, their deformed hands hanging down, their shoulders hunched up. They seemed, as I fancied, to be trying to understand me, to remember, I thought, something of their human past. I went on shouting, I scarcely remember what, that Moreau and Montgomery could be killed, that they were not to be feared. That was the burden of what I put into the heads of the beast people. I saw the green-eyed man in the dark rags, who had met me on the evening of my arrival, come out from among the trees, and others followed him, to hear me better. At last, for want of breath, I paused. "Listen to me for a moment," said the steady voice of Moreau, "and then say what you will." "Well," I said. He coughed, thought, and then shouted, "Latin, Prendick. Bad Latin. Schoolboy Latin. But try and understand. Haenam sunt homines. Sunt animae quae nos habeas vivisected. A humanizing process. I will explain. Come ashore." I laughed. "A pretty story," I said. "They talk, build houses. They were men. It's likely I'll come ashore. The water just beyond where you stand is deep and full of sharks." "That's my way," I said. "Short and sharp. Presently. Wait a minute." He took something out of his pocket that flashed back the sun, and dropped the object at his feet. "That's a loaded revolver," he said. "Montgomery, here you will do the same. Now we are going up the beach until you are satisfied the distance is safe. Then come and take the revolvers." "Not I! You have a third between you." "I want you to think over things, Prendick. In the first place, I never asked you to come upon this island. If we vivisected men, we should import men, not beasts. In the next, we had you drugged last night. Had we wanted to work you any mischief? And in the next, now your first panic is over and you can think a little. Is Montgomery here quite up to the character you give him? We've chased you for your good, because this island is full of inimical phenomena. Besides, why should we want to shoot you when you have just offered to drown yourself? Why did you set your people onto me when I was in the hut? We felt sure of catching you and bringing you out of danger. Thereafter, we drew away from the scent for your good." I mused. It seemed just possible. Then I remembered something again. "But I saw, in the enclosure." "That was the puma." "Look here, Prendick," said Montgomery. "You're a silly ass. Come out of the water and take these revolvers and talk. We can't do anything more than we could do now. I will confess that then, and indeed always, I distrusted and dreaded Moreau, but Montgomery was a man I felt I understood." "Go up the beach," I said after thinking, and added, "Hold your hands up." "Can't do that," said Montgomery, with an explanatory nod over his shoulders. "Undignified." "Go up to the trees, then," I said, "as you please." "It's a damned silly ceremony," said Montgomery. Both turned and faced the 6 or 7 grotesque creatures who stood there in the sunlight, solid, casting shadows, moving, and yet so incredibly unreal. Montgomery cracked his whip at them, and forthwith they all turned and fled, helter-skelter into the trees. And when Montgomery and Moreau were at a distance, I judged sufficient. I waded ashore and picked up and examined the revolvers. To satisfy myself against the subtle trickery, I discharged one at a round lump of lava, and had the satisfaction of seeing the stone pulverized and the beach splashed with lead. I still hesitated for a moment. "I'll take the risk," I said at last. With a revolver in each hand, I walked up the beach towards him. "That's better," said Moreau without affection. "As it is, you have wasted the best part of my day with your confounded imagination." And with a touch of contempt which humiliated me, he and Montgomery turned and went on in silence before me. The knot of beastmen, still wondering, stood back. Among the trees, I passed them as serenely as possible. One started to follow me, but retreated again when Montgomery cracked his whip. The rest stood silent, watching. They may once have been animals, but I never before saw an animal trying to think. Chapter 14. Dr. Moreau explains. "And now, Prendick, I will explain," said Dr. Moreau, so soon as we had eaten and drunk. "I must confess that you are the most dictatorial guest I've ever entertained. I warn you that this is the last I shall do to oblige you. The next thing you threaten to commit suicide about, I shan't do, even at some personal inconvenience." He sat in my deck chair, a cigar half consumed in his white, dexterous-looking fingers. The light of the swinging lamp fell on his white hair. He stared through the little window out at the starlight. As I sat as far away from him as possible, the table between us and the revolvers to hand, Montgomery was not present. I did not care to be with the two of them in such a little room. "You admit that the vivisected human being, as you called it, is, after all, only the puma," said Moreau. He had made me visit the horror in the inner room to assure myself of its inhumanity. "It is the puma," I said, "still alive, but so cut and mutilated, I pray I may never see living flesh again. Of all vile—" "Never mind that," said Moreau. "At least spare me those youthful horrors. Montgomery used to be just the same. You admit that it is the puma. Now be quiet while I reel off my physiological lecture to you." And forthwith, beginning in the tone of a man supremely bored, but presently warming a little, he explained his work to me. He was very simple and convincing. Now and then there was a touch of sarcasm in his voice. Presently I found myself hot with shame at our mutual positions. The creatures I had seen were not men, had never been men. They were animals, humanized animals, triumphs of vivisection. "You forgot all of that skilled vivisector can do with the living things," said Moreau. "For my own part, I'm puzzled why the things I have done here have not been done before. Small efforts, of course, have been made. Amputation, tongue-cutting, excision. Of course, you know, a squint may be induced or cured by surgery. Then, in the case of excising, you have all kinds of secondary changes, pigmentary disturbances, modifications of the passions. Alterations in the secretions of fatty tissue. I have no doubt you have heard of these things." "Of course," I said. "But these foul creatures of yours—" "All in good time," he said, waving his hand at me. "I'm only beginning. Those are trivial cases of altercation. Surgery can do better things than that. There is a building up as well as breaking down and changing. You've heard perhaps of a common surgical operation resorted to in cases where the nose has been destroyed. A flap of skin is cut from the forehead, turned down on the nose, and heals in the new position. This is a kind of grafting in a new position of part of an animal upon itself. Grafting of freshly obtained material from another animal is also possible. The case of teeth, for example. The grafting of skin and bones is done to facilitate healing. The surgeon places in the middle of the wound pieces of skin sniped from another animal or fragments of bone from a victim freshly killed. Hunter's cockspur, possibly you've heard of that, flourished on the bull's neck, and the rhinoceros rats of Algeria, Zovaz, are also to be thought of. monsters manufactured by transferring a slip from the tail of an ordinary rat to its snout and allowing it to heal in that position." "Monsters manufactured," I said. "Then you mean to tell me—" "Yes, these creatures you have seen are animals carven and wrought into a new shape. To that and to the study of the plasticity of living form, my life has been devoted. I have studied for years, gaining in knowledge as I go. I see you look horrified, and yet I'm telling you nothing new. It all lay in the surface of practical anatomy years ago, but no one had the temerity to touch it. It is not simply the outward form of an animal which I can change. The physiology, the chemical rhythm of the creature may also be made to undergo an enduring modification, of which vaccination and other methods of inoculation with living or dead matter are examples that will no doubt be familiar to you. A similar operation is the transfusion of blood, with which subject, indeed, I began. These are all familiar cases. Less so, and probably far more extensive, were the operations of those medieval practitioners who made dwarfs and beggar cripples, show monsters. Some vestige of those art still remain in the preliminary manipulation of the young mountebank or contortionist. Victor Hugo gives an account of them in L'Homme Quitri. But perhaps my meaning grows plain now. You begin to see that in a possible thing to transplant tissue from one part of an animal to another, or from one animal to another, to alter its chemical reactions and methods of growth, to modify the articulation of its limbs, and indeed to change it in the most intimate structure. And yet this extraordinary branch of knowledge has never been sought as an end, and systematically by modern investigation, until I took it up. Some such things have been hit upon in the last resort of surgery. Most of the kindred evidence that will recur in your mind has been demonstrated, as if it were by accident, by tyrants, by criminals, by the breeders of horses and dogs, by all kinds of untrained, clumsy-handed men working for their own immediate ends. I was the first man to take up this question, and armed with antiseptic surgery, and with a real scientific knowledge of the laws of growth, yet one would imagine it must have been practiced in secret before, such creatures as the Siamese twins, and in the vaults of the Inquisition. No doubt their chief aim was artistic torture, but some at least of the inquisitors must have had a touch of scientific curiosity. But, I said, these things, these animals talk. He said it was so, and proceeded to point out that the possibility of vivisection does not stop at mere physical metamorphosis. A pig may be educated. The mental structure is even less determinate than the bodily. In our growing science of hypnosis, we find the promise of a possibility of superseding old inherent instincts by new suggestions, grafting upon or replacing the inherent fixed ideas. Very much indeed of what we call moral education, he said, is such an artificial modification and perversion of instinct. Pugnacity is trained into courageous self-sacrifice, and suppressed sexuality into religious emotion. And the great difference between man and monkey is in the larynx, he continued, in the incapacity to frame delicate, different sound symbols by which thought could be sustained. In this I failed to agree with him, but with certain incivilities he declined to notice my objection. He repeated that the thing was so, and continued his account of his work. I asked him why he had taken the human form as a model. There seemed to me then, and there still seems to be now, a strange wickedness to that choice. He confessed that he had chosen that form by chance. I might just as well have worked to form sheep into llamas and llamas into sheep. I suppose there's something in the human form that appeals to the artistic turn of mind more powerfully than any animal can shape. But I've not confined myself to man-making. Once or twice, he was silent for a minute, perhaps. These years, how they've slipped by. And here I've wasted a day saving your life, and now wasting an hour explaining myself. But, I said, I still do not understand. Where is your justification for inflicting all this pain? The only thing that could excuse vivisection to me would be some application. Precisely, he said. But you see, I am differently constituted. We are on different platforms. You are a materialist. I am not a materialist, I began hotly. In my view, for it's just this question of pain that parts us. So long as visible and audible pain turns you sick, so long as your own pain drives you, so long as pain underlies your proposition about sin, so long, I tell you, you are an animal, thinking a little less obscurely what an animal feels. This pain, I gave an impatient shrug at such sophistry. But it is such a little thing. A mind truly opens to what science has to teach must see that it is a little thing. It may be that, save in this little planet, this speck of cosmic dusk, invisible long before the nearest star could be attained, it may be, I say, that nowhere else does this thing called pain occur. But the laws we feel our way towards, why, even on this earth, even among living things, what pain is there? As he spoke, he drew a little penknife from his pocket, opened the smaller blade, and moved his chair so I could see his thigh. Then, choosing the place deliberately, he drove the blade into his leg and withdrew it. No doubt, he said, you have seen that before. It does not hurt a pinprick. But what does it show? The capacity for pain is not needed in the muscle, and it is not placed there. It is but little needed in the skin, and only here and there over the thigh is a spot capable of feeling pain. Pain is simply our intrinsic medical advisor to warn us and stimulate us. Not all living flesh is painful, nor is all nerve, nor even all sensory nerve. He's full of bullshit there, sorry. There's no taint of pain, real pain, in the sensation of the optic nerve. If you wound the optic nerve, you merely see flashes of light, just as disease of the auditory nerves simply means a humming in our ears. Plants do not feel pain, nor the lower animals. It's possible that such animals as the starfish and crayfish do not feel pain at all. Then with men, the more intelligent they become, the more intelligently they will see after their own welfare, and the less they will need to goad them out of danger. I never yet heard of a useless thing that was not ground out of existence by evolution sooner or later. Did you? And pain gets needless. Then I am a religious man, Pendrick, as every sane man must be. It may be, I fancy, that I have seen more of the ways of this world's maker than you, for I have sought his laws in my way all my life, while you, I understand, have been collecting butterflies. And I tell you, pleasure and pain have nothing to do with heaven or hell. Pleasure and pain, bah! What's your theologian's ecstasy but Mamet's houri in the dark? The store which men and women set on pleasure and pain, Pendrick, is the mark of the beast upon them, the mark of the beast from which they came. Pain, and pleasure. They are for us only so long as we wriggle in the dust. You see, I went on with this research just the way it led me. That's the only way I have ever heard of true research going. I asked a question, devised some method of obtaining an answer, and got a fresh question. Was it possible? Or that possible? You cannot imagine what it means to an investigator. What an intellectual passion grows upon him. You cannot imagine the strange, colorless delight of these intellectual desires. The thing before you is no longer an animal, a fellow creature, but a problem. Sympathetic pain. All I know of it I remember as a thing I used to suffer from years ago. It was the one thing I wanted, to find out the extreme limit of plasticity in a living shape. But, I said, the thing is an abomination. To this day I've never troubled about the ethics of that matter, he continued. The study of nature makes a man at last as remorseless as nature. I have gone on not heeding anything but the question I was pursuing, and the material has dripped into the huts yonder. It's nearly 11 years since we came here, I and Montgomery, and 6 Kanakas. I remember the green stillness of the island, the empty ocean about us, as though it were yesterday. The place seems waiting for me. The stores were landed and the house was built. The Kanakas found some huts near the ravine. I went to work here upon what I had brought with me. There were some disagreeable things happened at first. I began it with a sheep, and killed it after a day and a half by slip of the scalpel. I took another sheep and made a thing of pain and fear and left it bound up to heal. It looked quite human to me when I had finished, but when I went to it I was discontented with it. It remembered me and was terrified beyond imagination, and it had no more than the wits of the sheep. The more I looked at it, the clumsier it seemed, until at last I put the monster out of its misery. These animals without courage, those fear-haunted, pain-driven things without a spark of pugnacious energy to face torment, they are no good for man-making. Then I took a gorilla I had, and upon that, working with infinite care and mastering difficulty after difficulty, I made my first man. All the week, night and day, I molded him. It was chiefly the brain that needed molding. Much had to be added, much changed. I thought him a fair specimen of the... Oh boy, I'm not reading that. When I had finished him, and he lay bandaged and bound, and motionless before me, it was only when his life was assured that I had left him, and came into his room again and found Montgomery much as you are. He had heard some of the cries as the thing grew human, cries like those that disturbed you so. I didn't take him completely into my confidence at first, and the Kanakas, too, had realized something of it. They were scared out of their wits by the sight of me. I got Montgomery over to me in a way, but he finally had the hardest job to prevent the Kanakas deserting. Finally they did, and so we lost the yacht. I spent many days educating the brute. Altogether I had him for 3 or 4 months. I taught him the rudiments of English, gave him ideas of counting, even made the thing read the alphabet. But at that he was slow, though I've met with idiots slower. He began with a clean sheet mentally, had no memories left in his mind of what had been. When his scars were quite healed and he was no longer anything but painful and stiff, and able to converse a little, I took him yonder and introduced him to the Kanakas as an interesting stowaway. They were horribly afraid of him at first, somehow, which offended me rather, for I was conceited about him. But his ways seemed so mild, and he was so abject, that after a time they received him and took his education in hand. He was quick to learn, very imitative and adaptive, and built himself a hovel rather better. it seemed to me, than their own shanties. There was one among the boys, a bit of a missionary, that he had taught the thing to read, or at least pick out letters, and give him some rudimentary ideas of morality. But it seems the beast's habits were not all that is desirable. I rested from work for some days after this, and was in mind to write an account of the whole affair, to wake up English physiology. Then I came upon the creature squatting up in a tree and gibbering at two of the Kanakas who had been teasing him. I threatened him, told him the inhumanity of such a proceeding aroused his sense of shame, and came home resolved to do better before I took my work back to England. I have been doing better, but somehow the things drift back again. The stubborn beast flesh grows day by day back again. But I mean to do better things still. I mean to conquer this puma. But that's the story. All the Kanakas boys are dead now. One fell overboard of the launch, and one died of a wounded heel that he poisoned in some way with plant juice. 3 went away in a yacht, and I suppose have hope were drowned. The other one was killed. Well, I've replaced them. Montgomery went on much as you are disposed to do at first, and then— "What became of the other one?" I said sharply. "The other Kanaka who was killed." The fact is, after I made a number of human creatures, I made a thing." He hesitated. "Yes?" I said. "It was killed." "I don't understand," I said. "You don't mean to say—" "It killed the Kanaka, yes. It killed several other things it caught. We chased it for a couple of days. It only got loose by accident. I never meant for it to get away. It wasn't finished. It was purely an experiment. It was a limbless thing with a horrible face that writhed along the ground in a serpentine fashion. It was immensely strong and in infuriating pain. It lurked in the woods for some days until we had hunted it, and then it wriggled into the northern part of the island, and we divided the party to close in upon it. Montgomery insisted upon coming with me. The man had a rifle, and when his body was found, one of the barrels was curved into the shape of an S, and very nearly bitten through. Montgomery shot the thing. After that, I stuck to the ideal of humanity, except for little things. He became silent. I sat in silence watching his face. "So, for 20 years altogether, counting 9 in England, I've been going on. And there is still something in everything I do that defeats me, makes me dissatisfied, challenges me to further effort. Sometimes I rise above my level. Sometimes I fall below it. But always I fall short of things I dream. The human shape I can get now almost with ease, so that it is little and graceful, or thick and strong, but often there is trouble with the hands and claws. Painful things that I dare not shape too freely. But it is the subtle grafting and reshaping one must needs do to the brain that trouble lies. The intelligence is often oddly low, with unaccountable blank ends, unexpected gaps. And least satisfactory of all is something that I cannot touch. Somewhere, I cannot determine where, in the seat of emotions, cravings, instincts, desires that harm humanity. A strange hidden reservoir to burst forth suddenly and inundate the whole being of the creature with anger, hate, or fear. These creatures of mine seem strange and uncanny to you so soon as you begin to observe them. But to me, just after I make them, they seem to be indisputably human beings. It's afterwards, as I observe them, that the persuasion fades. First one animal trait, and then another creeps to the surface and stares out at me. But I will conquer yet. Each time I dip a living creature into the bath of burning pain, I say, this time I will burn out all of the animal. This time I will make a rational creature of my own. After all, what is 10 years? Men have been 100,000 in the making, he thought darkly. But I am drawing near the fastness. This puma of mine. After a silence, and they revert as soon as my hand is taken from them, the beast begins to creep back, begins to assert itself again. Another long silence. Then you take the thing you make into those dens? I ask. They go. I turn them out when I begin to feel the beast in them, and presently they wander there. They are all dread this house and me. There is a kind of travesty of humanity over there. Montgomery knows about it, for he intervenes in their affairs. He has trained 1 or 2 of them to our service. He's ashamed of it, but I believe he half likes some of those beasts. It's his business, not mine. They only sicken me with a sense of failure. I take no interest in them. I fancy they follow in the mockery of rational life, poor beasts. There's something they call the law, singing hymns about all thine. They build themselves their dens, gather fruit and pull herbs, marry even. But I can see through it all, see into their very souls, and see there is nothing but the soul of beasts. Beasts that perish, anger, and the lust to live and gratify themselves. Yet they're odd, complex, like everything else alive. There's a kind of upward striving in them, part vanity, part waste sexual emotion, part waste curiosity. It only mocks me. I have some hope of this puma. I have worked hard at her head and brain. And now, he said, standing up after a long gap of silence, during which we had each perused our own thought. What do you think? Are you in fear of me still? I looked at him and saw but a white-faced, white-haired man with calm eyes. Save for his serenity, the touch almost of beauty that resulted from his set of tranquility and his magnificent build, he might have passed muster among 100 other comfortable old gentlemen. Then I shivered. By the way of an answer to his second question, I handed him a revolver with either hand. Keep them, he said, and snatched at a yawn. He stood up, staring at me for a moment, and smiled. You've had 2 eventful days, he said. I should advise some sleep. I'm glad it's all clear. Good night. He thought me over for a moment, then went out by the inner door. I immediately turned the key in the outer one. I sat down again for some time, in a kind of stagnant mood, so weary, emotionally, mentally, and physically, that I could not think beyond the point at which he had left me. The black windows stared at me like an eye. At last, with an effort, I put out the light and got into the hammock. Very soon I was asleep. So quoth this raven. Oh my, there's so much to say about this section, isn't there? Everything from Coco the gorilla and her sign language to, I went to a lecture by Jack Horner a year or 2 back, and he was talking about their work in switching on and off genes inside a chicken egg to create a dinosaur. And while they have to destroy the embryos at a very early stage, this is a bit of that, I think. Anyway, sorry to ramble. Have a wonderful weekend, darlings. My darlings, it means so much to me that you come and listen to my little stories. I so appreciate it, but if you did like it, please feel free to hit the like button and subscribe so you can come back and hear more My dearest thanks to my supporters, past and present. It means so much to me. Have a lovely day, my darlings.